טוב, בוקר טוב לכולם, ואני מבקש מכולם לתפוס את מקומותיהם. אנחנו רוצים לפתוח את המושב בזמן. אני מבקש מכולם להתיישב במקומות. המורה שלי לצרפתית הייתה אומרת, עוברי לקיה אפרמי לבוש. מי שהבין, הבין? זה הדבר היחיד שאני זוכר מלימודי הצרפתית. אז בוקר טוב לכולם וברוכים הבאים ליום השני של כנס צ'ייס למחקרי חדשנות וטכנולוגיות למידה, השם הפורמלי. אני יורם אשד ואני אהיה יושב ראש המושב הזה, ואני נורא שונא להיות יושב ראש כי אני תמיד מתבלבל ושוכח, אז אם אני אשכח יורם השני יזכיר לי. תמיד כנס של יורמים, יורם קלמן ואני. אני אתחיל בזה שהבטחנו, כמו שאתמול, רובכם הייתם בכנס של אתמול, לפי ההרשמה רוב האנשים נרשמו לשני הימים, כך שאני לא אחזור על כל הדברים שנאמרו אתמול, רק אני מזכיר את מה שניצה גרי, דוקטור ניצה גרי, שהיום היא ראש המרכז, סיפרה עליו אתמול, על סקר, על אחד הדברים החדשים, המסורות החדשות שאנחנו מנסים להתחיל, והיא המסורת של מחקר, של מין סקר רץ שאוסף את העמדות שלכם לגבי טכנולוגיות למידה, בכל שנה, ואתמול ניצה הציגה ממצאים ראשוניים מהסקר המקוון שכולכם קיבלתם, ואשר 40% מכם אכן ענה, כ-200, כמה? 239 תגובות, ועל סמך זה ניתחנו את הממצאים, והיום אני אדווח, אתמול דיווחה ניצה על התפיסות הכלליות שקיבלנו מה-quick and dirty ניתוח שעשינו בהתחלה, והיום אני אוסיף את המבט של ספרים דיגיטליים. בכל שנה אנחנו נאסוף מכם רעיונות לנושא שמעניין אתכם ללמוד עליו, ואחד מהם יהיה הנושא שעליו ימוקד הסקר, איזו טכנולוגיה חדשה וכו'. השנה הטכנולוגיה החדשה שאנחנו בוחנים היא טכנולוגיית הספרים הדיגיטליים, לאור הפרויקט המאוד יומרני ומאוד עתיר המשאבים של משרד החינוך להטמיע במהלך 5 השנים הקרובות את ספרים דיגיטליים במערכת החינוך בישראל. זה מעלה הרבה שאלות, אבל מעלה גם הרבה ציפיות ופותח פוטנציאלים חדשים, ושאלנו את דעתכם לגבי הפרויקט הזה. אני אציג פה רק ממצאים ראשוניים, אתם יכולים לחשוב על זה, אנחנו מתכוונים במהלך הזמן להתחיל לרכז את הממצאים האלה. אז כמו שאתם רואים כאן, אם אנחנו מפלחים את העמדות שלכם כלפי חדשנות טכנולוגית, אנחנו רואים שרובכם, המספרים שאתם רואים למעלה, מה? סליחה, אז יש פה משהו שאני רואה, סליחה, כי זה מק ואני רואה בצד את העיניים שלי לא רואות הרבה. אם אנחנו מפלחים את הממצאים לפי העמדות שלכם כלפי חדשנות טכנולוגית, לפי 3 פקטורים, תועלת והישגים, נוכחות ומאמצי שילוב וחשיבות של הטכנולוגיות החדשניות, אנחנו רואים באופן ברור שבכחול רובכם הייתם, והמספרים זה הממוצע בסקאלה של מ-1 עד 7, רובכם הייתם בעד או חושבים שהחדשנות טכנולוגית היא דבר בעל תועלת מרובה, בעל חשיבות גבוהה וכולי, בהטמעה שלה בהוראה, באקדמיה. כל ההבדלים פה הם מובהקים סטטיסטית, אבל אתם שמים לב שכששאלנו אתכם על ספרים דיגיטליים, זה כאילו, אני מזכיר לי את הבדיחה על ירושלים, כולם אוהבים איזה עיר, הייתי מת לגור שם, אבל אף אחד לא רוצה לגור שם, אני גר שם. אז זה הסוג של הממצא הזה שאנחנו רואים כאן, ופה זה מין ממצא שכדאי לכם להתחיל לחשוב עליו, איך אנחנו מתייחסים באופן כללי, וכאשר ניגשים לבעיה הספציפית, כבר מתחילות תהיות, ואז בואו נראה. בשלב הבא עשינו פילוח של הנתונים לפי כמה חתכים. קודם כל נמצא שלא היה הבדל בעמדות, בתפיסות, בין גילאים שונים לבין עיסוק, אבל מה שכן מצאנו, שהיו הבדלים כאשר פילחנו לפי מידת המומחיות במידה מסוימת במחקר על ספרים דיגיטליים, ופה אתם רואים בכחול בעלי תואר שלישי ודוקטורנטים היותר מומחים, או אלה שעסקו בזה יותר במחקר, לעומת בעלי תואר ראשון ושני וסטודנטים שהם בשלבים יותר ראשוניים של עבודתם. כאמור, לא מצאנו הבדלים בעיסוק, זאת אומרת, אצל מורים, ולא מצאנו פה הבדלים משמעותיים, אבל אתם רואים בפירוש שככל שאתה מתמחה יותר במחקר של הספרים, אתה יותר ספקן, זה אני מדבר פה על הצבע הכחול, אתה יותר ספקן לגבי הפוטנציאל שלהם לייצר איזה תועלת או חשיבות, והגדול, אתם רואים שהממוצע הנמוך יותר הוא בנוכחות ומאמצי שילוב. מן הסתם אומר משהו לגבי תהליכי ההטמעה של טכנולוגיה בעלת פוטנציאל, שאיפשהו בלב יש רמז שאולי משהו בדרך ידלוף, כמו יש הרבה מים בצנרת, אבל יש הרבה חורים שדולפים, וזה אתגר גדול שאומר שההטמעה היא מאוד חשובה כאן. כשבדקנו את ההגדים, היה בסקר, היו גם שאלות פתוחות, כשבדקנו את ההגדים שלכם בשאלות הפתוחות לגבי הטמעת ספרים דיגיטליים, אני אספתי פה באופן מאוד סלקטיבי, זה לא הספקנו, אבל התמונה היא מאוד אמביוולנטית שמייצגת גם את המצב של הספרים הדיגיטליים, מין שלב ראשוני, עוד לא יודעים בדיוק לאן זה ילך. שמתי פה הגדים, באדום זה ההגדים המזהירים מפני, בירוק ההגדים שאומרים דווקא טוב, אז ככה במהירות, אין תחליף לספר ביד, מסייע לתלמידים להתמקד ולהתרכז, חס וחלילה שתכניסו ספרים דיגיטליים, לעומת זה, ואו ספרים דיגיטליים תגרום לקריאה שטחית, קופצנית, כל הדברים הרעים. לעומת זה, סוף סוף אפשר ללכת עם ספרייה שלמה בכיס, הספר הדיגיטלי מזניק את הלמידה קדימה, כדאי להסב את ספרי הלימוד לדיגיטליים, אך עדיין לאפשר כתיבה וקריאה מתוך טקסט כתוב, זה בדיוק האמביוולנטיות הזו. ולמטה שאלות באדום לגבי תהליך ההטמעה, המעבר החפוז עלול להיות בכייה לדורות, רעיון הספר דיגיטלי ללא רוויזיה של תוכנית הלימודים, יהיה מהלך לא יעיל. ובסוף לא צריך להיחפז, בינתיים נשאיר את זה וגם את זה. וזאת שאלה שאנחנו עומדים בפניה עכשיו, והיא מייצגת כרגע את מה שלמדנו מכם כחוקרים. כמו שהזכרתי אתמול, זה שוב אלה נתונים מאוד ראשוניים, אנחנו מקווים שאם במשך השנים נצבור מין מסורת כזו שלאט לאט תספק לנו מעין מדד צ'ייס לחקר חדשנות בטכנולוגיות למידה או חקר טכנולוגיות חדשניות, ולאט לאט נבנה כחלק מתפקידנו כבניית קהילה, נבנה פה איזה מין מאגר ידע שלכם כחוקרים וכפרקטישנרס שעוסקים בדברים. כזכור, בשנה שעברה כבר התחלנו במסורת של מאמר, אנחנו תמיד מתלבטים איך לקרוא לזה, מאמר סטודנט מצטיין ומאמר מצטיין של סטודנט, Best Student Paper Award, in English it sounds better, והשנה כזכור, מתוך ה-20 מאמרי סטודנט שהגיעו, הוגשו כמאמרי לתחרות הזו, הוגשו הרבה, אני לא זוכר כמה, והתקבלו מתוכם 20, חצי מהמאמרים שעמדו בסטנדרטים, שכזכור, ה-rejection rate היה כמה, יורם? קיבלנו כ-40% מהמאמרים, מתוכם נבחרו 7 שהיו המועמדים לתחרות, ה7 האלה עברו review blind, עיוור בין חברי ועדת התוכנית, והמנצח השנה הוא מאמרה של תרצה לוטרמן ורקפת אקרמן, ואני מזמין את תרצה לקבל את התעודה. תרצה? יש פה 2 עותקים. רגע.
תוך כדי המדרגה.
כמו שעושים את זה עם הצ'ק של...
על הבית.
אוי, די,
תודה רבה. ותודה לרקפת.
כמובן זו עבודה משותפת של תרצה, שרקפת אקרמן הידועה לכולנו, מכירה אותה מזה שנים. מה? הרצאתה היום, כן, הרצאתה היום, by the way, היא הרצאה כמעט הנועלת של הכנס, שווה לכם להישאר עד אז. And now I switch to English, and I'm glad to introduce you to our keynote speaker of today. She fled the chilly English weather and came from to share knowledge with us from University of Nottingham. She's Professor Shaaron Ainsworth, and I will read her bio because I always feel like I should read it exactly. I hate to read from paper. Dr. Shaaron Ainsworth is an associate professor at the School of Education at the University of Nottingham. She has a BSc in psychology, an MSc in artificial intelligence, and PhD in learning sciences from 1997. Dr. Ainsworth's work focuses on learning with multiple visual representations, but she has recently expanded this interest to haptic representations, embodied representations, and drone representations. This research has been supported by the British Council, ESRC, EPRC, and NESTA of the UK, the EU Sixth Framework Programme, and the Office of Naval Research and National Science Foundation of the USA. She has published over 100 journals and conference papers. The book chapters on this topic. Her work in this area is very well cited. Her Functions of Multiple Representations paper has been cited over 500 times. And she is one of the few education researchers who has published in Science. This will give you an idea where you should gear your papers. Her current position is Assistant Director of the University of Nottingham's Learning Sciences Research Institute, a joint venture between the Schools of Psychology, Education, and Computer Sciences. She teaches and supervises PhD students for all the three schools. Today, Shaaron will share with us some of her knowledge in a lecture titled Understanding and Transforming Multi-Representational Learning. And before I invite her to the podium, I remind you that there are still some places for the meeting with her, the student meeting with her, but some professionals who are not students can also join. It is between 11 and 12. It's between 10:45 and 12 in Kanwar, and you are well invited to listen to her sharing her knowledge beyond this lecture. Okay, Shaaron, you're welcome.
I'd like to thank the Yorams for inviting me. It's been really interesting, particularly Yoram, who has looked after me so well in Jerusalem before coming here. So thank you very much. It's great to be here. And today I'm going to talk on an unusual topic for me, understanding and transforming multi-representational learning. And I guess I want to argue in this talk that perhaps we've been asking the wrong questions, myself included, and perhaps we need to change our focus a little. So I'm going to hope to do some of that today. But one thing I'm really aware of is I had the luck to be born in England, so I'm a native English speaker. Hooray! Now this means I'm going to forget when I'm giving a talk that I'm speaking too fast. So I'm going to hold the responsibility for this over to you. So I want you to do this right now with your hands. Show me. This means speed up, Shaaron. Now I want you to do this. This means slow down, Shaaron. So when I am going too fast, it is your responsibility now. You know what to do. I can monitor you in my peripheral vision. Okay. So it's your fault, not mine. So let's have a look at our typical world. I hope this is roughly in focus for you. I mean, these kind of things, digital versions and this is in fact a paper version, are completely commonplace now. This is what our young people are learning with. They're not learning with text. They're learning with this buzzing, blooming confusion of text and video and graphics and animations and speech and talking to each other and drawing and writing and photos. This is the world in which we educate our young these days. It's a multi-representational world. And so the first thing that I'd like you to do is I'd like you to talk to each other. So here is a typical piece of multimedia, about as simple a piece of multimedia as you can get. I've got some text and I've got a picture. And for the next just 2 minutes, talk to the people next to you about why you think this would help you learn. What is it about this pair of representations? You might be thinking about perception, you might be thinking about emotion, you might be thinking about metacognition. What is it about these representations would help you or wouldn't help you learn? Okay, go. Okay. I really hate to stop you because I suspect you'll gain as much from this as from me talking, but I'll try. So, you could do that for the whole 45 minutes and get more benefit than me standing here. I know that. Nonetheless, what I want to hope to show you that probably you were talking to each other, depending on your background and your training, about many different issues when you looked at that pair of representations. If you were coming from a typical psychological information processing background, you might have been talking about issues to do with short-term memory and working memory. If you were coming from a cognitive science background, you might have been talking about the expressive characteristics of representations. If you were coming from some other psychological backgrounds, you might be talking about affect. Educational backgrounds, we might be thinking more about motivation, emotion. I hope some of you, I know some of you from conversations I've already had, would have been thinking about the metacognitive aspects of these representations. I'm fascinated by the strategic aspects of combining these representations. There are aesthetics choices that you might have been responding to and saying, that is one ugly heart. Why has she shown such an ugly heart? You know, and I think what I want to say is you're all right, okay? You probably even have more issues that I haven't raised. But there are so many competing factors when we try and understand learning with even this too, really quite simple representations. And perhaps as a result of this massive complexity of trying to understand, if we take something like this simple text plus picture, which, you know, some people would call, okay, this is a multimedia effect. And then we look into the literature to say, does text plus pictures help learning? What we actually find in a slide I've stolen from Katerina Scheiter, we get this mixture of results. Yay, text and pictures helps us learn. Ooh, text and pictures are no better than text alone. Boo, text and pictures are worse than text alone. And at the moment, we don't seem to be able to synthesize and predict ahead of time whether we're going to get a green dot, an orange dot, or a red dot. Well, why is this? I mean, we're clever folks. We've been doing this 30, 40, 50 years. Why are we not yet able to know? And I think it's partly because of all these different factors. We're not disembodied working memories when we learn from these things. We're not just responding to our personal preferences. So we have all these factors that are going on. But also, representations, I think, are at least a 5-way interaction. To find the perfect representation, we must know something about the representational properties. We must know something about the task to which the representation is being put. We must know something about the learners, what they already know, whether there are individual differences that are important here. We know, and we're ignoring, that there are massive assessment aspects around representations. And again, context, a representation works within a context. So it's at least a 5-way interaction when we're trying to understand this. So to some extent, but only to some extent, I've kind of given up recently on trying to find the perfect representation. And saying perhaps doing that is really to kind of focus on tying our learners' hands behind our backs. We're not really looking at the ways to get the best from multiple representations when we're so seeking the perfect combination. Maybe instead we should be looking not just at design factors, but what we can support learners to do with these representations. So at the moment, my research is really dealing with 3 interlocking themes. There's the design theme, which I can never quite go away from, finding the right choices. But then I'm very interested in what it is that we should be encouraging learners to do to make the most of the representations we're providing them with. And although my own research is not great in this area, I do fundamentally believe that we need to also be exploring the way that teachers should be supporting learners to do this. So I see this very much as this 3-way intersection at the moment. So really, I'm actually today going to focus more in this circle than I am in perhaps my earlier work, which was much more in this circle. And actually, I think I'm transitioning here. So ask me back in 20 years, and I think I'll be mostly in this domain. So that's my preamble. And I'm just going to say that I have some assumptions, and I might as well be explicit about my assumptions so you know what you're disagreeing with. So my assumption is that learning is multi-representational, and it's increasingly multi-representational. We learn much less from direct experience than we used to, and we're now learning through its mediated expression. I also believe that learning should lead to meta and representational competence. So when we're learning, we shouldn't just be learning the domain in some pure Platonic way, but we should be also learning to understand, select, explain, critique, and invent representations. And such learning is an intertwined process, that you're learning with and about the representations simultaneously. And it's really hard for us as experts, I think, to remember how difficult it is for students to do this, because they don't have complete domain or representation knowledge. So I want to take you back just briefly to look at just one of those pictures that was on my second slide. Here we are, something aimed at 11-year-old children in the UK called the human life cycle. And this all makes sense to us, right? We understand what it's trying to say. But now imagine that you don't understand what it's trying to say. So you've got a woman, and she turns into a fertilized egg. And the fertilized egg turns into a baby. It turns into a toddler. It turns into a boy. It then turns into a girl, who turns into a man, who then somehow turns into a baby. It's only the fact that we know how to read this that allows us to see what it's actually saying. And because of this, we just constantly forget how difficult integrating and understanding multiple representations actually is. So just remember, don't come at this with our understanding. Come at this with the understanding of the people who are actually trying to do this. And you end up amazed that they can ever do it at all. So how am I doing? Show me a gesture. Do I need to... Okay, I like that gesture. That's a nice gesture. So let's turn to some empirical studies now. So I'm going to say what we really want to be doing with multiple representations is we want to be supporting learners to make meaning from multiple representations. And I'm going to say that your favourite technique to help people make sense of multiple representations is just as good as my favourite technique to help people make meaning from multiple representations. But mine is something like this. I want to encourage sustained work. So first of all, I think that most of the time we spend far too little. We just give people too little opportunities to make meaning. We give them 10 minutes with this animation, 20 minutes with that simulation. I've done work when people have been working with the same simulation for 8 hours and they're still beginning. So I think we need to be sustained. It's got to be effortful. We all know that superficial processing doesn't help. But I don't see why that effort shouldn't be playful. So I'm going to show you an example of playful effort in a second. It's got to be constructive. And we want it to be supported through communication. Representations are phenomenal in how they allow us to talk to each other. You just experienced that again when I put up the multimedia example. Obviously, I'm going to talk quite a bit about interaction, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about reflection. So I never managed in my work to get all of these working together at the same time synergistically, but I still believe one day I will. So these are the sorts of things I'm going to be talking about. But each study is actually kind of going to emphasize something slightly different. So the first study and set of issues I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about effortful play and interaction with representations as a way of helping learners make meaning from multiple representations. And for those of you who are here yesterday, I guess we're going to be slightly back in Doug's world to start with. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is games as representational systems. So I think games are just external representations in a way. It's the great thing about a representational researcher. We can go anywhere and do anything. It's fantastic. It's like perfect empire building thing for an academic. And what we've been trying to understand in this work with my student Jake Hagbud in particular is to try and understand, well, if you take a representational perspective on games, what is an effective game? And we decided that this was an effective game. It had to have two elements to it, that there was fun in educational games, but it had to be the right sort of fun. So we said that for us, this term of intrinsic integration, which is similar to Doug's conceptual integration, is that we want to deliver the learning material through those parts of the game that are most fun to play. Riding on the back of the flow experience, I think many of you will know of this term, where you're so embedded in the game and you're so in the flow of it, and we don't want to diminish or interrupt its impact, because so many educational games are, you have some fun, now you have some learning. You have some fun, you have some learning. And we didn't want that. We wanted the fun and the learning to be integrated. And the second part of our definition is we wanted the representational component, if you like, is we said we wanted to embody the learning material within the structure of the gaming world. So really what we're trying to do is provide a representation of what should be learned, and that you're interacting through it through what game designers call the core mechanics of the game. And this is a whole argument against, many of you will have heard this phrase, chocolate-covered broccoli. Does this ring any bells with some of you? The notion that you've got children and you want to try and get them to eat their greens, so you take your broccoli and you cover it in chocolate. And by covering it in chocolate, you will persuade your 6-year-old to down his broccoli. That's what we were fundamentally arguing against. We're saying we don't want chocolate-covered broccoli. We don't want to sugarcoat learning. So what we did was we developed a game to try and test these predictions, that the best learning happens from games when you combine fun and rules in this way. And this is, I hope you can see, this is a screenshot from our game. It's called Zombie Division. It's aimed at, 8-9-year-old children in the classroom Jake and I both have backgrounds in interaction design, so to get here, you don't want to know it, but there was pen and paper prototyping and interaction design and lots of times playing games with children in classroom to get here. But this is what we ended up with. So you may not like zombies, but trust me, 9-year-old boys and girls love playing with zombies. So the idea is that you're a hero. You're matrices, you're a Greek hero, and you are wandering around a dungeon fighting zombie skeletons. And these zombie skeletons have numbers on their chests. And you've got some weapons. And if you pick the right weapon, you will defeat the skeleton. So which one have I got here? 6. So I shouldn't pick a 5 to defeat this skeleton. If I pick up my gauntlet and try and beat him with a 5, he will beat me back. And eventually he will kill me and I will have to start the level again. But if I pick up a 3, hurrah, I will divide him into 2 quotients. Ghosts will arise from his body with the divisors on, and hurrah, I can proceed through the level. So I've got a multiplication table in the corner to support this. And as we go through the levels, obviously the numbers start getting bigger, you get more divisors. And also we use other kind of core mechanics. So to stop kids just dividing every even number by 2, we start to give zombies weapons to fight you back. So if you fight them with a 2, it'll fight you back, so you can't do that. If you try to divide everything by 2 smaller number, we get giant skeletons. And if you divide a giant skeleton by 2 smaller number, then it divides into 2 really aggressive skeletons that come and get you. And we also try and support proceduralization. So at the beginning, a skeleton will never come to you. But as you get more experience with the divisors, then actually it starts to speed up. So we're trying to encourage proceduralization. And you get challenge levels as well. So you can sort of, if you can sort of see perhaps the psychological traditions that we're trying to embody in here as well. So this is our intrinsic version. We're saying that this version, the fun, fighting the skeletons, is where the learning happens, because that's where the maths is as well. This is not, to us, chocolate-covered broccoli. But we did create a version that, to us, is chocolate-covered broccoli. So on the left here now, you see zombie skeletons, but now they've just got symbols on their chests. And your weapons are just symbolic, and all you're doing here is you're pattern matching. You're playing the game, you're fighting the skeletons, but it's only at the end of the level that you get a maths quiz. Okay, so at the end of the level, you get exactly the same maths that your friends were getting in the other version. You know, I can't read my own slide here. Can 70 be divided by 2, 5 or 6 or something? And you practice the maths, this time in a complete chocolate-covered broccoli way. Fun happens here, learning happens here. And we also produced a control group, incidentally, who only ever fought skeletons. They didn't do any maths at all. And so what we're trying to do with this, we're trying to see and make predictions about whether this is right, because although I haven't got time to go into it now, you could say, well, maybe by intrinsically integrating all of this information to put the fun and the learning into the flow state, you're going to be inhibiting reflection, and perhaps this won't be a good way to learn. Perhaps the learning in the game will stay locked in the game. So you could make the argument that this might not be perfect, and this one, which is closer to school maths, might still help kids learn. So what we did was we took nearly 60 7 and 8-year-olds. They played the game in total for 2 hours and 15 minutes. One of the things we really didn't want to do was design the teacher out. So if you can see from my slide, they take a pre-test, they play the game, and they play the game in sort of 15-minute chunks over lots of days. And after they've been playing the game for about an hour, all of the children in all of the 3 different conditions have a teacher-led reflection session. So she helps make sense of the learning in the game. And she was brilliant. She was so brilliant that Jake married her. So you know, we have a have good in interaction here. So we've got 3 classroom teachers, we've got the same classroom teacher leading 3 classes of kids. And then they go back and they play the game some more. And then at exactly 2 hours, they get the end, they get a post-test. And all the tests are delivered in symbolic form. So there's no skeletons to be seen. So we're stacking the odds against our preferred condition here. And then actually, because we're sort of interested in the preparation for future learning idea, about 4 weeks later we went back and they played the game again just for another 15 minutes, and then they had another test. So it's quite a long study. So these are the results. What you can see is a pre-test, there's no differences between the conditions. By post-test, the intrinsic group looked to be doing better, and by delayed post-test, you can see that they are now significantly outperforming. But actually, in some ways, the more startling finding is that the extrinsic group are not reliably different to the control group. So doing this 2 hours of practicing, 2 hours and 15 minutes of practicing the end-of-level maths was no more effective than the children who just had the lesson alongside them. So this does, for me, sound a real warning about gamification. This kind of, let's just put rewards and things into a game-like element. In our study, that was no more effective than not doing it at all. And yes, the extrinsic version was, a lot more effective. But in a result that I like almost even more, in a second study, what we did was we looked at children's free choice. So we were in an after-school club this time. We just had 16 children, slightly older. And what we said was, here's Zombie Division. You've got 2 versions of it. You've got the intrinsic version, and you've got the end-of-level test, the extrinsic version. And you can play Zombie Division, or you can just do what normally goes on in the after-school club. And all we did was we recorded how long they chose to spend playing it. And what we find is that children spent 61% of the 3 after-school clubs playing the intrinsic version, compared to 8%. And given that we made them play each version just for 5 minutes to get a sense, there's basically no spontaneous use of the extrinsic version whatsoever. So when you combine these 2 findings, you've got the intrinsic is a lot more effective when you control time on task, and children much, much, much prefer playing it. And when you ask them why that is, you get some fantastic data. So they say things like, it's better to learn by doing it the intrinsic way just because it's quicker, okay? It's more fun because it's like subliminal advertising with maths, which is a beautiful insight, I think, from an 11-year-old child in a working-class British industrial city. They don't like the extrinsic version. They say things like, oh, I've had the fun part now I have to do the test. I'm just going to turn it off and not bother. One child out of the 16 we interviewed said they preferred the extrinsic version, and this is the rationale, because it's the one the teacher would like best. Which is, of course, not even true. So, the first thing I want to say is let's design our representations to encourage playful, sustained, effortful interaction. The next thing I'm going to say is I'm going to keep on talking about effortful interaction and reflection, and there's still a little bit of playfulness, but perhaps a little bit less than there was before. So, some strategies now, some traditional strategies. So I think for a long time now in this area, we've known that verbal strategies can be a very effective way to help people learn complex material. So famously, the self-explanation effect by Mickey Chi is a piece of knowledge generated by the student that goes beyond the information that was given. We know that this is a very, very effective strategy. The effect sizes on this are large, and we know that it supports learning from text. We know that it supports learning from pictures. We know that it supports learning from multiple representations. Okay, been there, done that. Let's do something else. So what I'm interested in at the moment is non-verbal strategies. And in particular, I'm going to talk to 2 non-verbal strategies today, gesturing and drawing. And don't get too comfortable, because you're going to be doing some of this. So let's start with gesturing. Gesturing's very in at the moment. We know that gesturing can enhance either the memory or understanding. Obviously, the work of Susan Golden Meadow here is a groundbreaking in this area. Chewing Keita in the Netherlands, De Koning and Tabbers, all of these have done some really interesting work. What we wanted to do was we wanted to try and start to understand a little more about why it is that gestures might be improving learning with a representational focus, because I'm a representational researcher. So we're interested in showing people representations and having them gesture to the representations. And we think that gestures might encourage learning here, because they might just be increasing arousal or interest or motivation. So it might be a quite non-specific effect. Or it could be that if you're looking at something and you're also gesturing it, you're developing dual coding of what you're looking at. That's also consistent. It could be that if you look at something and you have to understand it and gesture it, well, you have to just process it more deeply if you've got to gesture it. Maybe by gesturing something, you're guiding attention to relevant information. And the most controversial, but perhaps most interesting, is related to the embodied cognitive ideas that by gesturing something, you're activating body-based representations. So you're getting at a sort of knowledge that's difficult to get to unless you start enacting and gesturing this knowledge. So the topic that we're doing this research in is this. I'm a diver, so this is fantastic for me. But in fact, so this is the domain. This is work done with the Tübingen group, so with Katharina Scheiter and Peter Gergetz, who you might know have done a lot of work on understanding fish visualization. And what we're doing here is we're helping learners in this particular study just understand fish movements. So this is a serious domain. We know that learners in this area are trying to understand and classify biological locomotion patterns. We want to identify the relevant moving parts used for propulsions. So which part of the body is it? Which fins are you using? And also they should be able to identify the type of movement. Is this an undulation or is this an oscillation? And therefore biologists use this, and there's probably biologists in the room. In fact, I can see one of them looking at me right now who's saying, you're completely simplifying this, Ainsworth, and you're completely right, I am. But, you know, this is a sort of learning that we want them to be doing. So can they recognize that a subcarriagiform is using undulation of the body as a whole, whereas the labriform is using oscillation of the pectoral fins? Although actually we didn't get them to learn the terminology in this study. We're just asking them to describe. And this is the kind of domain. So, I think you need to try this. So, here we have some stimuli from our experiment. And what I want you all to do now is come back. I want you to enact this learning in your body. Off you go. Stand up if you want to. It's okay. Don't be shy, you can do it under the table if you need to. The ray is one of my favorites, it's a gorgeous one. Okay, have you got that one down? Okay, let's try another one. Okay, do this one. Oh, I like that one. I like that one. Come on. Don't be shy. Let's see you go. Very good. So these are just two of our stimuli, and actually they're probably the easiest to gesture. They're certainly, as a speaker, the most amusing to have you gesture. So these are the domains, these are the sorts of materials that we're looking at, although these are the two of the simplest. So, and because we're representation researchers, we're interested in looking at this around the format of the representation. So I've shown you videos here, but actually quite a lot of the way you learn this stuff is from static materials. So in this study, we were contrasting gesturing, but also contrasting whether you were having dynamic visualizations like these videos or a sequence of key photographs from the videos. Because we thought that it could be the case that gesturing and the effects of gesturing may depend on the format of the visualization. So dynamic visualizations provide very accurate information for you to base your gestures on. So potentially we're going to improve gesture accuracy, whatever gesture accuracy might be. And we also know that these sorts of representations are prone to illusions of understanding. So perhaps if you gesture them, this will make you process them more deeply than you would do if you didn't have to gesture them. But on the other hand, static visualizations, if you're trying to learn this from key frames in the photographs, you've got to use mental animation to infer the continuity of movement. And we already know that gesturing helps mental animation. So perhaps gesturing would be particularly beneficial for this reason. And we also know that inferring motion from series of static representations seems to load spatial ability, so seems to require spatial abilities. And again, we know that gesturing helps tasks that involve spatial reasoning. So in other words, essentially, we didn't know. We could make an argument for gesturing as being particularly beneficial for dynamics and particularly beneficial for statics. It was win-win. So these are the study that we did. So we took people into the lab. This is a lab study this time. We gave half of them gesture instruction, and it was basically just enact what you're looking at with your body. We didn't tell them what to do or how to do it. And then the other half, we didn't mention gesturing. That's all. We didn't forbid them from gesturing. We just didn't mention it. And then half got videos like you've seen, and half got photographs. And hopefully I've got enough time just to show you somebody doing some of this for real. Good. So I have another study to go yet. So this is my very, very serious German. She's a researcher, so she's given us permission to show this. So she's a kind of pilot study for us. But we didn't know till afterwards. She's a trained ballet dancer. And you can see this, we've moved for a different fish. And now she's doing a really hard fish now, which I didn't show you. And she's trying different ways to do it. And you'll see in a second she'll probably get, I kind of get how to do this now. And so this is effortful play, right? I mean, she's putting effort in here to do this. And Katerina and I are doing lots of gesture coding here to try and understand and describe some of this. And we've certainly developed our own special language to describe what we're looking at here. So one of the things we think we're noticing is as their confidence with what they're watching grows, their amplitude of their gestures get bigger. So anyway, I have her for a lot, so at the end maybe we can put her back on and we can just watch her, because she's gorgeous to watch. I wish my body moved like that. Okay, enough. So that's the setup. So it's a lab study. We're taking a number of dependent variables. So we're asking them mental effort. How much effort did you put in? We left them free to choose how long they spent looking at the videos or how long they spent looking at the static pictures. So that's important to me. I really hate controlled time on task studies. I like to leave them free to vary and control that statistically later. We're measuring the quantity of the gesture. Did they gesture not at all, a little bit, or a lot, basically? That's as sophisticated as we've got right now. And we've got learning outcomes. We gave them two sorts of tasks. The first was they showed 4 novel videos of fish patterns that they'd not seen before, and just said, can you describe it? Just give me a verbal description, what moves and how it moves. And we're in the middle of coding that because some of my other work on haptics, we've been finding that embodiment doesn't just change what you learn, but you start to produce much more conceptual metaphors. So you start to see it in a much more kind of embodied way. So we're going to be looking for that in the language. And we also gave them a classification task. So we showed them videos they hadn't seen before and basically asked them to classify them into is this a movement like this? And they had 6 pictures across the bottom and they just had to say it's one of those, it's one of those, it's one of those. So a classic non-verbal classification task. So those are the two sorts of learning outcomes. And we did things like make sure we didn't have trained divers do this study, because if you're a diver, you get taught gestures to recognize fish, and we didn't want that kind of stuff. We wanted just enacted stuff. So one of the things we did was we just measured the quantity of gestures that people did. So they saw 12 videos in total, 6 twice, for example, and we gave them this code of no gesturing, a little gesturing, a lot of gesturing. So you can see that if we don't give gesture instruction, the vast majority of people don't gesture at all. If we do give gesture instruction, most people gesture most of the time. But actually there's some people in the middle who gesture spontaneously, even though they're not given gesture instruction. And there are some people who don't want to gesture, even if given gesture instruction. And this has proved to be quite interesting, and we're doing extra analysis on that, which I probably haven't got time to describe. So in the description task performance, so just breaking them into gesture instruction, no gesture instruction, what we find is actually producing a verbal description, you're better from the static visualizations, from the sequence of pictures, not from the video, but gesturing isn't making any effect here. For the classification task, this is the non-verbal, just can you recognize and categorize it, then what we're finding here is there's no effect now of static versus dynamic. What there is there's an effect of gesturing. So irrespective of whether you had sequence of photographs or video, you were faster. Perfect. You were faster, you were more effective if you gestured it. And one of the things we found is that spontaneous gesturers, if we classify them by themselves, their effect size is twice as big as instructed gesturers, which is twice as big as non-gesturers. So there's something quite interesting about spontaneous gesturers. They do have higher spatial ability, as measured by the paper folding task, although spatial ability didn't predict how much you learn. So there's something complicated to uncover in there. So at the moment, our tentative conclusion is that the gestured aided visual learning, but not explicit verbal learning. So perhaps some sort of verbal overshadowing effect. So we're going to be digging deep into this data for a while yet. We've got a lot of video coding to do to try and understand if the sorts of gesturing you're doing is influencing how you learn. So the last non-verbal strategy, my current favourite, is drawing. So I'm fascinated by drawing. And I'm fascinated by drawing because once you stumble across it, you see how powerful it is. So drawing requires learners to make explicit their understanding, which helps them overcome gaps in their knowledge or generate new inferences. If you think you've heard that sentence before, you have. I've taken it from the self-explanation literature. So to start with, drawing works to me like self-explanation. But actually, it doesn't stop there, because with a self-explanation, you have a transient verbal representation. But with a drawing, you have something that you can inspect. And on re-inspection of that drawing, then actually you can iterate and bootstrap the process. So we know that actually pictures are particularly good at helping self-explanation, so it can help other effective strategies. And it can form the basis of productive discussion. So for me, drawing is like self-explanation with, bonus. So there are a number of studies out there. We've been interested in drawing in lots of ways, drawing to support observation, drawing as a strategy, drawing to support communication, drawing for assessment. But these studies I'm just going to talk about is drawing as a strategy again. So the typical kind of drawing studies here, people like Janice Gobetz or Peggy Van Meter, we typically ask learners to draw after reading, compared to, say, either reading alone or writing summaries or seeing pictures and texts. And we find that drawing is effective, especially on tests of deeper knowledge, but it isn't always effective. So I'm interested in not finding magic bullets, but making things better. So again, briefly, see if you can try this for yourself. I think we've got 45 seconds or so. So here's a sentence from the domain that I'm testing in. Can you quickly sketch, those of you who've got a pen in front of you, something that illustrates this sentence to yourself? Human life depends on the distribution of oxygen, hormone, and nutrients to cells in all parts of the body. Don't be shy. If you ask some people to draw and they leave, that's how much they hate being asked to draw. I make my students do this in class, and some of them respond as if this is the moment they've been waiting for all their education, and others respond like, you are evil, 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 and I'm going to find out where you live and kill your pets. Yes, human life depends on the distribution of oxygen, hormone, and nutrients to cells in all parts of the body. So in my office in Nottingham, I have, I guess now, 700 or 800 people's drawing of this sentence. So here are some examples that I've collected earlier. So when you ask people to draw, you get a massive range of response. Some people will just, like I would, they just draw lines and arrows. Other people draw very vivid, fun representations. This is actually my favorite of all the people who ever drew this. So this person wrote, you know, human life depends on the distribution of oxygen, nutrients, and hormones, or else you die. And actually, this person had previously received self-explanation training, and this to me is a self-explanation in drawn form. So my current drawing studies. What does learning by drawing depend on, and can we improve it? Does it matter who you draw for? Implicitly, children in the classroom draw for their teachers. Is this a good or bad thing? Does it matter if you like drawing or are good at drawing? Can drawing to learn be trained, and if so, should it be trained? These are the sorts of things I'm doing. And I'm doing it in the cardiovascular domain and in the respiratory domain. I'm doing it from 10-year-olds to undergraduates. Many studies, and typically I would do things like give drawing ability or learning habits. I would give pre-tests related to the domain, interventions which typically would be read, depending on your age and the topic, somewhere between 5 and 15 sections of text. And after each section, and they're normally a little bit bigger than the one you just saw, you draw something, and then you do a post-test. And these are the sorts of results I get. So this is a typical study looking at drawing for yourself and others. And you find, if you ask people to draw for themselves, they draw something much more sketchy. But if you ask them to draw for others, I see you, Yoram, enough now already. Then they draw these much more elaborate, complicated diagrams. And actually, in this particular study, just like a self-explanation again, the fragmented representation was just as effective at helping you learn as the very detailed, neat representation you drew for others. In terms of drawing training, this particular study, I trained people to create diagrams which were richer in content. I think you will agree there is no interaction here. Being trained to produce drawings which had rich content didn't help you learn any more than if you didn't. And I also gave a measure of drawing ability called the Bender-Gestalt test. That also didn't predict learning outcomes. But actually, again, what I get for drawings is I get some subtle and interesting results. So I find that non-trained people draw diagrams that are sketchy. Trained drawers or drawers high in drawing ability produce much richer, much more concrete, much more elaborate drawings. And actually those sorts of drawings go on to predict learning outcomes. So if you draw like this, you learn better than if you draw like this. So there's a very complicated relationship here, which I'm still uncovering, between drawing ability. Do you have to be good at drawing to learn by drawing? Well, no, but it does seem to help you draw diagrams of the sort that might help you learn. But if you can't, then actually training to do those seems to help. So this is very new research. It's not even presented yet, so this is still something that I'm finding interesting to try and understand. So where are we now? My last couple of slides. So I'm still thinking we should do more to understand how to design representations. I'm not saying let's give up on it. We still need to understand this, but we now need to understand how to use them effectively. And what's missing from this? Well, there's too little attention paid to teachers, both in my own work but also in the field in general. And there are exceptions to this rule. Some of these exceptions are sitting in this room, and I think it's an interesting area and an area that it's important and we should be looking at. The other elephant in the room is assessment. In the studies I've talked about today, we've tried very hard to make our assessments actually capture the sort of learning that was going on. But again, we're not spending enough time thinking about how we should assess representational learning, I think. So that's going to be the early SIG2 invited symposia is going to be assessing representational learning. So I'm going to go to that and learn some stuff. And the final thing I'd like to say, this is just my last study. This is a cladogram for those of you who are interested in biology education. And famously, at the moment, there's so many studies finding that high school students and college students can't reason with cladograms. We took 8-year-olds and gave them 10 minutes of instruction and found they could reason with cladograms. So I think mostly it's still, let's not make people guess how to use representations. Let's help them understand them. Let's not tie our learners' hands behind our backs and account for failure. Let's look how to support them and report success. So thanks to my collaborators on this work.
Thanks, Shaaron, very much for a brilliant lecture. I think you will agree it was a real enlightening lecture. And unfortunately, your coffee break is waiting for you, so I won't open it now to questions. I guess it will take a long time. You have a special session of meeting with Shaaron at 10:45 in Canva room, and it was meant for students, but I guess you'll all like to, but those of you who did not register, go to the room. If you want to meet with her, go to the room, see if you have place, and if there is place, get in. And now we are all, עכשיו אנחנו כולנו יוצאים להפסקה עד 10:45. ההפסקה היא פה בחוץ, ויורם קלמן, היורם השני.
כן, עוד שתי הודעות קטנות. אז שוב, מי שמעוניין להגיע לפגישת שאלות ותשובות עם המרצה, זה באולם קנבר, שזה קומה אחת למעלה. יש 20 ומשהו אנשים שנרשמים, אבל אנחנו ניתן להיכנס גם לאחרים. הדגש הוא על סטודנטים. הודעה שנייה חשובה. פנו אליי אתמול אנשים ואמרו, חבר'ה, אני מדבר על האוכל עכשיו, אז נא להקשיב.